This afternoon I watched a camping video, how to survive in the wild, on YouTube. There's countless examples of these videos in actual fact. I find them quite interesting in all honesty. But the thing I remark about in all of them is that it's not really how to survive in the wild, is it? Let's be honest. Because what all of these survivalists, these overnight or 1 or 2 night campers have in common is they've got a steak with them, or big fat burgers, or big sausages, and some of them even have curries and stir fries, etc., and potatoes, and cook up a weird and wonderful broth. It all looks very exciting and tasty, but this is not survival, quite frankly, at all. And how do I know that? Well, I've done it for real, in live field conditions, and I can assure you it really isn't survival. It's entertainment for YouTube, and of course some people do find it very entertaining. I find it entertaining as well, actually, I must admit, but I can assure you it definitely is not survival. So what is survival really out there? Well, I was hunted for a number of years and had to go off radar countless times, quite frankly. And the essential thing to remember at all times is the absolute necessity to maintain light security, because obviously at night time light attracts attention, like moths flickering to the flame. And when you're hunted, the last thing you want to do is attract attention. So light security is paramount at all times. I mean, there are ways to circumvent it, but not with a fire, and not by cooking steaks, etc., and the aroma of curry wafting through a forest. Truly. And that includes sub-zero temperatures, howling gales, driving rain, snow, you name it. I've been out in all of it, in actual fact. It was amusing because when I watched the video this afternoon, there was an American guy and he was camping by a lake, which obviously means that the temperature is lower, because when you're next to water, the temperature is lower, and also you get the wind chill factor coming across the lake. But my goodness, honestly, he had a proper, almost igloo-like tent with a wood burner inside it, and he was still whinging about the cold. And I just sat there and thought to myself, well, how on earth would this guy cope if he was having to do it in real life conditions? And I don't suppose you can make a video, in actual fact, to demonstrate what it's like in real life conditions, because you've got to maintain light security, haven't you? You can't have an Insta360 or a GoPro with you, or even your phone, on a tripod with lighting all around you and a blazing fire, or, a log burner inside or outside of a tent cooking up some wonderful nosh. Sort of defeats the object. I suppose the only way you would really be able to do it is with an IR camera, and even that is a no-no because it emits usually 6 infrared diodes. So there really is no way to do it, in all honesty. I mean, you couldn't even record it covertly on audio because you have to stay quiet as well. That's the whole objective behind being off radar, in a dark zone, as it were, and maintaining light security the whole time. But full credit to these guys. They're having a good time, and they're getting in loads of views. It's all clickbait. Let's be honest with you. There's no disrespect to any of them. It's all clickbait, absolutely guaranteed. Now you ask any special forces soldier who's been out there in the field, being hunted, trained to maintain light security, in extremely dangerous situations, and they'll tell you exactly the same thing. These guys are not survivalists. They're not doing survival videos. They're doing entertainment videos. You want to know what it's really like being hunted? Well, I was circulated as wanted for just under 4 years in total, and the last time I did it, in September 2017, you have to flick your mindset straight away. That's the key to surviving it, because you're going to be away for years. And that morning when I walked out the door at 6 a.m., 0600 hours, I knew I was going to be gone for years, and I wouldn't see that place for years, basically, the family home. And the night before, It's like waiting for D-Day to go into battle the next morning at the crack of dawn. And you know, when you've done military training, you know how to switch your mind into battle mind. And so I, you know, realized on the previous 2 occasions that the most important thing about being circulated, on the run, wanted, hunted, call it whatever you will, or lawfully or unlawfully at large, it's all a matter of opinion, quite frankly. I never regarded myself as being unlawfully at large, not once in actual fact. I regarded myself as being lawfully at liberty. It's a point I want to make repeatedly. I'm not going to stop making it. No one's going to stop me from making it. Okay? Right. So the thing you have to do is convert distress, because it's a distressing experience, into eustress. In other words, you have to convert poison into nectar, so to speak. Sounds very difficult, doesn't it? Actually, it's not. You know, you just have to convince yourself basically that you're doing something that is exciting and positive and rewarding, you know, and focus on that instead of being sidetracked by the negative issues. And there are many negative issues, and they're very difficult to deal with in actual fact, without a doubt. You know, I'm not going to make light of it. It really is a very difficult situation to be in. It's certainly not something I would advise anyone to do, particularly these 1 week and 2 week wonders. You know, I met a guy who said, yeah, I was on the run once. I was like, were you really? Yeah, he says, I was in the local pub for 4 weeks, innit? I was in the local pub for 4 weeks, getting pissed every day until Plod turned up to arrest him. I mean, come on. How on earth do you expect me to take people like that seriously? Obviously, I don't, do I? You know? And I've met other guys who've been on the run for like 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5 days. I'm like, yeah, right, okay, whatever. Okay, a week or 2. Yeah, gee whiz, it's nothing. Truthfully, I assure you, it is nothing. Try doing it for years. That's when it really gets to you. That is the real test of your crisis management, because it is a crisis, the whole of it. The whole experience is a crisis, and you're in crisis management the whole time. And you have to become clinically detached, particularly from family issues, etc. The people that you love, although you're never totally clinically detached from them, they're way back there on the back burner, so to speak, so that you can focus on what you're doing the whole time. I mean, I broke it off with my former fiance, quite simply because she couldn't cope with it, and I could cope with it. And I'd adapted to it. I'd gone through the adaptation process, and I'd done it before, you see, so I knew how to do it. I knew how to flick the switch into battle mind. And she couldn't cope with it at all, and she was just absolutely an emotional mess, quite frankly. No disrespect to her at all, in actual fact. She couldn't cope with it, and her emotionality was wrecked, quite frankly. So I decided the best thing to do, the kindest thing to do, was to end the relationship and walk away to allow her to get on with her life, and also to get on with my life. And a last warning to me was, you're going to go down a very dark path. Well, so what? That's the whole purpose, isn't it, of being on the run, in defense of your liberty and the right to freedom of expression. I don't regret it, and I'm never going to apologize to it for anyone, and certainly not to Elizabeth either. Even though she thought she deserved an apology, she didn't deserve an apology. She still doesn't deserve one, and she's not going to get one either, you know? It really is that simple. I did what I did because it was absolutely the right thing to do. So what's it like doing the right thing? Absolutely the right thing to do. Well, I can assure you there's no steaks and onions and mushrooms and cooking oil and frying pans and fancy tents and log burners and raging fires whilst you're on the run in a forest, particularly on a dark moon. Maintaining light security. You've got to know how to create as little light as possible. And that means you've got to have a set of clothing with you that is matte, just non-reflective. You know, I mean, it doesn't really matter so much on a dark moon, because there is no moon to reflect any light from or back at. But the simple truth is, you know, being matte black, as it were, or matte green, you know, you can't have any fancy colours. You've got to have plain colours the whole time. Nothing that attracts attention. And you've got to be able to cope with the intensity of it, the stress, okay? And sometimes that stress is so subtle It's like inhaling a black gas. Truly it is, quite frankly. I'm not exaggerating. It, yeah, subtlety, my goodness. I'm thinking back to all of those dark nights, and or the dark night of the soul, full stop, as it were, according to some people. But yeah, it is very pernicious, and it's progressive, it's very subtle, and ultimately when it builds up to a crescendo, and it does, being no doubt about it, yeah, it is very, very painful, because there's only so long that you can actually shelve feelings and incidents, particularly when you have news from back home, you know, about people that you knew from childhood who've died or committed suicide, and all of those terrible things. And I had all of those things when I was away, basically, you know, in the dark zone or the twilight zone. And, you know, all it ever did for me was make me wonder if I'd ever see home again, if I'd ever see my family again. But I focused on that, and that also became a cause célèbre in my own thinking, you know, not for anyone else, obviously. You know, I focused on that, and I thought, well, I will see them again one day. But first of all, I've got to get through this dark rain, the black rain, as it were. And that's how it was for me. It felt like walking through a dark valley, and the valley just went on and on and on for years. And the dark night of the soul simply meant that the black rain was dripping down from the skies into my soul. That's how it felt towards the end of it. That had simply accumulated so much black rain, i.e. dark experiences, that I couldn't see the light anymore, and was concerned that I would never see the light again. And it was, yeah, that was a really scary moment in actual fact. You know, and you've got to be able to cope with the sheer intensity of it, and the fast-paced excitement when you're being hunted, when you're being chased, and you know they're onto you, and you've got to move quickly. I mean, at one time, I was in 5 different cities in 7 days, and I woke up one morning, and I was completely disorientated, and I had no idea where I was. And I got up and walked to the window in this room, and I looked outside, and it was like, literally like being in a white fog, you know, a brain fog, and which is the result of stress in actual fact. And I looked out of the window, and it took about 5 minutes for the realization to dawn on me that I was actually in Manchester, and I'd come via Whitby, York, Leeds, Manchester, Liverpool, and then back to Manchester, and then the next day I was going back to Leeds. And yeah, that was one really heavy, intense experience in actual fact in late 2018. But I survived it, I got through it. And you accumulate all of these experiences, and the thing that you learn is that if you can't continue to convert distress into eustress, then you're finished, frankly. And that is the constant battle, truthfully. You know, the distress-eustress converter. And you have definitely got to convert that the whole time. And I remember being out one day on the West Yorkshire, North Yorkshire border in March 2019, and it was raining all day, bitterly cold, and snowing and hailing intermittently. I was in full wet weather gear, dressed all in black, and I was out from 7 o'clock that night until I finally went back to the hideout where I was at that time, and got tucked up in the tent, you know, maintaining light security, no fires, etc., nothing warm to eat. And the way I got around it was I bought a tin of mackerel from a shop in oil, and drained off the oil, poured hot pepper sauce into it, put the fork through it, and ate it. And that warms you up considerably. And then, of course, you have ginger is also a wonderful thing to use because it raises the body temperature by 4 to 5 degrees. It's a proven scientific fact. Yeah, they're all very cheap, easy to obtain in actual fact. And all these guys who are out there in these so-called survival and camping videos, you know, having a wonderful time eating 3-course meals in a tent or in a wooden hut or in a camper van, etc. I just think to myself, how would these guys cope if they ever had to do it for real? Would they be able to do it for real? And quite frankly, I have to say no. The vast majority of them would not be able to do it for real because they're used to the creature comforts. And we've seen that quite clearly in all of these videos that they make. So this really is a real survivalist video. Even though there's no scenery, as it were, no tent in the background, no campfire, no wonderful T-bone steaks sizzling from the supermarket, sausages, et al. Do you understand what I'm saying? There's none of that. You know, it'll be twilight in about 30 minutes here in actual fact, in rural Nottinghamshire. And I remember many nights like this, waiting for the dark to come. And at twilight, I would often disappear into a woodland or into a forest. And because in that light, and knowing what equipment you've got, you can put it together and secure your perimeter with some paracord and other tripwires, etc. And feel reasonably safe and secure. And I always had a high-powered Special Forces torch with me at all times. So I was never really concerned about being ambushed, because one click and whoever's trying to carry out the ambush is just blinded temporarily, you know, and they're not going to succeed. But obviously you don't use the torch unless it's absolutely necessary. It's not for waving around like a lightsaber to have fun with. And so, and that's another thing in all of these videos. You know, they've all got these wonderful lamps and lanterns and torches, etc. And I just think to myself, you know, how would they actually cope with real live field conditions when they can't use any of these things and their eyes have got to adjust to natural light ambience or lack of light ambience when you've got to switch, you know, into dark mode and without night vision goggles, that is. And yeah, it's very difficult. And so what I would say to these guys basically is, you know, it's all very well making these videos, they're very entertaining, but why don't you try it for real? You know, and I'm not talking about going on the run, so to speak, although that is the ultimate test, in actual fact. Why don't you try it for real? Why don't you do it without the steaks and the wonderful supermarket nosh, and all this weird and wonderful food they take with them from the supermarket in the camper van and in their Bergen as they hike to the location of their latest video, to try and convince people that they're so wonderful and brave and living such a life on the edge, when in actual fact they're really not, because they're doing it for a night or two and it's done purely for clickbait, for entertainment, for monetized channels, for them to make more money from, and to continue entertaining people. I mean, that's all it is really. It's entertainment, you know, it's theatre, pantomime. Let's put it bluntly, frankly, you know, because I've done it for real and I can tell you for a fact it is theatrical, all of it. It's entertaining theatre without question, but it's not the real deal. And that's what I would say to them is, you know, to all of these content creators, these so-called survivalists, is go out there and do it for real with maintaining light security. Do it in sub-zero conditions as well, you know, when your tent's 4 feet deep in snow and you can't make a fire of any description and you just have to get warm with the equipment that you've got. And you can't make a fire to make a hot tea or coffee or any other form of hot drink, you know. Try doing that, and of course that probably wouldn't be quite so exciting, would it, or entertaining, because what people want is to be entertained, and usually the real world isn't very entertaining, because what we have in the West in particular is people raised on a diet of absolute claptrap by the mainstream media, particularly the Hollywood fantasy industry or the Hollywood dream factory. You know, that's what they're used to, that's what they can process. Anything that's real and raw, you know, that's difficult for them to process. And that was one criticism I had about the Hunter docu-series. People said, oh, why don't you make it a lot more polished than what it was? Well, there's a very good reason for it. It's not polished, because it wasn't a polished experience, was it? It was about being on the run for years, in actual fact, and I wanted it to be as real and raw as possible. That's why it's not polished. That's why I didn't professionalize it, as some people might say. I can do that very easily. In fact, I could professionalize this video far more than what it's going to be when it appears on YouTube. But I don't want to, because I don't want to come across as being overly theatrical, overly professionalized, because it looks fake and theatrical and just a pantomime. And that is the whole purpose of this video, is that I'm not a pantomime actor. I'm here to bring you the real world. And if you can't cope with the real world, then that's fair enough. Stick with all the faker. I mean, there's loads of it around, you know, just endless choice. But what I can tell you is this. Yeah, you know, if I was able to make a video of what it's really like, and you can never really do that now because I'm not in that situation now. But there are many times, in actual fact, several times, I would say, when I was on the run, you know, I thought to myself, should I try and make some sort of video, not to release at that time, but later for the sake of posterity? And whichever way I looked at it, and whichever way I thought I might be able to do it, you know, I just thought, well, I've got to breach light security every single time to do it. And that's just going to attract attention. And so therefore, I'm not going to do it. And I didn't do it. And that's why I'm making this video now, all these years later, because I wasn't able to do it. And that's the point I'm making. And I can only make it again and again. You know, you cannot make a video about what I'm talking about without breaching light security. Maintaining light security is the objective. So that's what I would say to these guys, yeah, is go and try it for real. Go and do it for real. I'm not talking about after you've made your video and you switch the lights off, etc., and you hear a few scary noises, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. Heard it all before, seen it all before, done it. Yeah? Go and do it for real. The whole thing, and do it for days and days on end. I remember one 11-day session that I did, which was in North Yorkshire, which was really, really intense. Sleeping out every night in a tent, yeah. And then I remember another phase in West Sussex, just on the cusp of the South Downs, where I did it for 3 weeks every night. And the ground was baked to the hardness of concrete because the summer there was so hot that year in 2018. And yeah, it was really uncomfortable. And at the end of the 3-week period, when I came out of the jungle, so to speak, that's how I used to think of it, and I actually got to a hotel and went in the shower, the water that ran from my body was light brown, you know. I was literally accumulated so much dirt. Yeah, the water was a light brown, medium brown colour in actual fact. I just stood there and laughed as the water went down the plug hole. And I scrubbed myself thoroughly twice with shower gel and washed my hair, etc. Doled myself up and went out to the seafront. That was at Eastbourne. Yeah, I made a video about it, you know, in the docu-series. And yeah, and that was raw. You know, that was raw living, and there were some very dangerous moments there as well. And that's another thing that you can't document whilst you're on the run. Whilst you're being hunted, whilst you're surviving for real, you know, and it's a constant battle. You know, you've got to maintain the pace, and you've got to be fit and strong, and more importantly, there's no point trying to behave like a tough guy. I can tell you the vast majority of these so-called tough guys, they're actually quite soft inside. You know, they have a very low tolerance threshold, and they tend to break under duress, you know. They can cope with it for a few days, 2 or 3 weeks, etc. But the longer it goes on, the more and more it grinds. And it does grind, believe me, it really, really grinds. You know, I remember being in Oxford, I think it was in early September 2019, you know, just a few weeks before it came to an end. And I sat by the canal, and I thought to myself, is this ever going to end? When does this end? And I guess it was that point, and I was in, what, just 2 years at that time. I'd been away for 2 years at that time in the underground. And I realised then, I thought, maybe this is the end. maybe it'll be over soon, or maybe it's going to go on for even more years. And because I'd actually become quite ill at the time, and had an infection, I couldn't get antibiotics, couldn't go to a hospital, couldn't go to a GP, obviously a general practitioner, a doctor, to receive any form of treatment. I have to stay off the radar. And it was critical for about 2 weeks as to whether I would actually have to go to an hospital for treatment. But using natural remedies and the knowledge I'd accumulated of herbal medicine and natural medicine over the years, I was able to pull myself out of the infection stage using natural ingredients. But it had done an awful lot of damage to my body. And I was later diagnosed with complex fistulating Crohn's disease, which I suffer from now. So there's no way I can do those things. My health is just gone. The